The Twisted Lens, Episode 8. What does it mean to be neutral during wartime? The war in the Ukraine is obviously the biggest story of the year and threatens to affect everyone on the planet. This is serious business, and yet some countries have made it a national policy not to get involved or to remain neutral, regardless of the tragic events that are unfolding. I didn't really understand what neutrality meant, and it sounded kind of suspicious and spurious to me. Does it really, really, protect the country from harm? Switzerland is the most famous neutral country, and yet they just supported sanctions against Russia. So what is going on here? We may need to twist the lens and look at neutrality from a different perspective. Being neutral is a real thing and carefully defined under international law, specifically Convention 5 of the Hague Congress back in 1907. And sure, there have been a few updates since then, but the principles largely remain the same. In more modern times, Finland, Austria, Sweden, and a handful of other countries are also documented as neutral by the United Nations. Now, to be concise, a neutral country can defend itself, but cannot take sides in any conflict, and by law may not be invaded by belligerents, which is a fancy word for bad guys. Sounds like a nice idea, but I'm not sure of the practical realities. The Swiss' original notion to be neutral apparently was based on their mountainous terrain and what they felt was a decent army that could protect them. Well, maybe protect them against the Red Baron circa 1917, but certainly not from a nuclear radiation cloud circling the world that knows nothing about international borders. And in fact, during World War II, Switzerland, they appeared to remain neutral, but it was really just luck and timing that saved them. German planes violated Swiss airspace 190 times, and the Nazis actually drew up an invasion plan called Operation Tannenbaum to totally overrun the country, overthrow the government, and I guess presumably seize Swiss assets. Hitler, he just ran out of time. And the Swiss themselves, they may not deserve a humanitarian medal either. During the last war, they accepted gold deposits from all sides, even gold knowingly confiscated from Holocaust victims. Okay, that's being neutral, I suppose. Also, they refused to admit more than a handful of Jewish refugees, which is in a direct contravention of neutrality protocols. And it gets worse. They also accepted Jewish money for safekeeping and then forgot to give it back, which resulted in a $1 billion settlement with Holocaust victims and their families. Well, since I'm picking on the Swiss, they've also broken neutrality a number of times just in the past few years against Iraq, Iran, North Korea, and others, and even against Russia back in 2014. This neutral thing is confusing. So why should I care about any of this? Well, in the vote last week at the UN, 5 countries actually sided with Russia. 35 others abstained, presumably with the idea of neutrality. Really? And even though the Swiss are allegedly siding with the European Union now and freezing billions in Russian assets, a deeper dive and closer look shows they also continue to be the trading house for all Russian commodities, effectively allowing Russia to pay for the war. Whose side are they really on? To dumb it down for myself, would I trust the Swiss to babysit my kids? No, I would not. As an aside, I don't think infamous marauders like Genghis Khan, I don't think they would have respected neutrality anyway. And I'm guessing that Mr. Putin is less inclined to honor historical treaties either. So really, what's the point? Anyway, notwithstanding that modern warfare seems ridiculous in such an interconnected financial world, it might be time for all the so-called neutral countries to pick a side, because knowing who has your back and who doesn't is critical in any kind of fight. It's been about 80 years since the last major war in Europe. Naively, I thought, I hoped I would see peace throughout my lifetime. But it was George Santayana who said, "Only the dead have seen the end of war." Sadly, he was right.